Back with Michael Handel's Masters of War, Classical Strategic Thought, Third Revised and Expanded Edition. Chapter 7, The Rational Calculus of War, Correlating Ends and Means. So first, from Thucydides, The History of the Peloponnesian War. It is a common mistake in going to war to begin at the wrong end, to act first, and to wait for disaster to discuss the matter. And then we have Machiavelli from his Discourses. Whoever makes war through choice or ambition has the intention of making gains and keeping them, and of acting in such a way as to enrich his city and his country, and not to make them poor. He must then, both in the gaining and in the keeping, take care not to spend, but rather to do everything to the profit of the public. Alright, if war is a means of achieving political objectives, the fulfillment of these objectives requires the careful continuous correlation of means and ends. Sun Tzu approaches this issue through the development of what modern literature refers to as the pure rational decision-making model. So Sun Tzu from The Art of War, weigh the situation, then move. And again now, the elements of the art of war are first, measurement of space, second, estimation of quantities, third, calculations, fourth, comparisons, and fifth, chances of victory. Quantities derive from measurements, figures from quantities, comparisons from figures, and victory from comparisons. In this highly systematic decision-making process, factors such as objectives and comparisons of relative strength are evaluated carefully in considering various courses of action and in estimating the probability of victory. Clausewitz argues that, from On War, quote, no one starts a war, or rather no one in his senses ought to do so, without first being clear in his mind what he intends to achieve by that war and how he intends to conduct it. Then again in another place in On War, he, the belligerent, would act on the principle of using no greater force and setting himself no greater military aim than would be sufficient for the achievement of his political purpose. Clausewitz explains why the rational calculus of war is an ongoing process. So from another part of On War, of even greater influence on the decision to make peace is the consciousness of all the effort that has already been made and of the efforts yet to come, since war is not an act of senseless passion, but is controlled by its political object. The value of this object must determine the sacrifices to be made for it in magnitude and also in duration. Once the expenditure of effort exceeds the value of the political object, the object must be renounced and peace must follow. Perhaps because of his stronger belief in the value of intelligence or his faith in the benefits derived from observance of the proper religious rituals, Sun Tzu is convinced that rational calculations will usually bring about the intended results. In The Art of War, rational calculations are considered a virtual guarantee of success. Clausewitz is much more pessimistic and realistic regarding the possibility of rationally calculating a war's outcome. So, quote, to discover how much of our resources must be mobilized for war, we must first examine our own political aim and that of the enemy. We must gauge the strength and situation of the opposing state. We must gauge the character and abilities of its government and people, and do the same in regard to our own. Finally, we must evaluate the political sympathies of other states and the effect the war may have on them, that is, the other states. To assess these things in all their ramifications and diversity is plainly a colossal task. Rapid and correct appraisal of them clearly calls for the intuition of a genius. To master this complex mass by sheer methodological examination is obviously impossible. Bonaparte was quite right when he said that Newton himself would quail before the algebraic problems it could pose. The size and variety of factors to be weighed and the uncertainty about the proper scale to use are bound to make it far more difficult to reach the right conclusion. End quote. So both Sun Tzu and Clausewitz view war as an essentially rational activity involving the careful and continuous correlation of ends and means. At the same time, they are fully aware of the crucial effect of non-rational factors, such as morale, motivation, and intuition. Clausewitz, however, appears to be more conscious of the difficulty of relying on rational calculations. As a result, he assigns a greater role to the unpredictable influence of elements such as friction, chance, unreliable intelligence, and sheer complexity. In his more limited expectations of the benefits flowing from rational calculations, Clausewitz is in many ways more realistic than Sun Tzu. On the other hand, Clausewitz assumes, in accordance with the traditions of raison d'etat, that the political leadership will pursue a rational policy intended to benefit the state and maximize its power. This is, of course, not one of the principal reasons for Clausewitz's insistence on the primacy of politics and on war in general as an instrument of politics. But this idea, which Clausewitz never questions in On War, is much too simplistic. The fact that politics provides the purpose for waging war does not mean that the purpose itself is always rational. Non-rational political objectives can be implemented by rational means. As he should have known from the leadership of Napoleon, the objectives and strategic decisions of such leaders are not necessarily rational and may often be intended to fulfill their personal or dynastic ambitions, not to promote the interests of the state. Indeed, Clausewitz, more than any other theorist of war, dedicates extensive attention to the non-rational, psychological, and intangible factors that always play such an important role in war. These are the subject ...